Boeing Starliner is getting ready to head back to Earth, but without its crew.
There's a strange noise coming through the speaker, and I didn't know if you could connect into the Starliner and let me,
Boeing Starliner.
Boeing Starliner.
Designed to accommodate 7 passengers, or a mix of crew and cargo, for missions to low Earth orbit and service missions to the International Space Station for NASA, the Starliner has an innovative, weldless structure and was said to be reusable up to 10 times within a 6-month turnaround. It also featured wireless internet and tablet technology for crew interfaces. When NASA Administrator Bill Nelson was asked how sure he was that Boeing's spaceship would fly with a crew again, he confidently said 100%. He mentioned that he had talked to Boeing's CEO before the press conference in Houston on Saturday, who told him they are determined to keep going and fly Starliner again. Still, not everyone is as sure about this. Starliner is expected to come back from space as early as next week, but the 2 astronauts who launched in June for what was supposed to be an 8-day mission at the International Space Station will now have to stay for 8 months because of problems that came up during the test flight. This is another setback for Boeing during what has been a difficult year for the company. Over the weekend, the space agency said the 2 astronauts stuck at the International Space Station will return next year on a SpaceX Dragon capsule. But what really happened to the Boeing Starliner? How would the astronauts cope until then? What would they eat? How would they cope psychologically? Well, stay tuned. We're about to find out. The International Space Station is a big spacecraft that circles the Earth about 400 kilometers above us. It's a joint project between NASA, Russia's space agency Roscosmos, the European Space Agency, Japan's Aerospace Exploration Agency, and the Canada Space Agency. The ISS is used mainly for research in space biology, astronomy, and weather. Many missions related to the ISS happen throughout the year. The route to the ISS is often busy with missions that bring supplies or run experiments. In June 2024, astronauts Suni and Butch were part of one such mission, but their main task was different. They were testing a new spacecraft called the Starliner, which they would later use for their trip. Their job was to see how well it worked, making sure it was safe and could reliably take astronauts to and from the ISS. They planned to stay on the ISS for 8 days doing research and regular daily tasks on the station. But here's the catch. The Starliner spacecraft is made by Boeing, and 2024 was already a tough year for the company. Things got worse when these astronauts ended up stuck in space. So what exactly is Boeing's Starliner? And what went wrong? About 10 years ago, in September 2014, NASA picked Boeing and SpaceX to help create transportation for astronauts traveling to the ISS and other low Earth orbit locations. By 2017, Boeing got a $4.2 billion contract to finish and certify its Starliner spacecraft, while SpaceX received a $2.6 billion contract for its Dragon spacecraft. The Starliner had some strong points. It could be reused up to 10 times before needing any major repairs, could carry up to 7 astronauts or a mix of crew and cargo, and it could be launched using other rockets like SpaceX's Falcon 9. At the time, NASA trusted Boeing for its reliability and experience, especially compared to SpaceX, which was less predictable than the well-known Boeing. Even 10 years ago, Boeing was respected in the space industry, known for its early work in space travel, its role in designing and building the ISS, and its efforts in commercial space projects. Boeing was always going to be NASA's top choice, but that was in the past. In 2024, Boeing's reputation has taken a big hit, and even before this mission, there were signs that things might not go smoothly. The Starliner capsule didn't get to the right orbit during an unmanned test flight, causing worries that this could make it harder for the US to send astronauts into space. Back in 2019, the first unmanned test flight also failed because of a software problem. The second test flight in 2022 was a little better, but there were still problems with the cooling system and thrusters, hinting at more issues. This current mission with Suni and Butch is the first time people have been on the Starliner going to the space station. While it reached the ISS and docked, NASA was probably not happy with what happened next. Starliner's problems can be divided into two main areas: helium leaks and thruster failures. The trouble began before the launch when a helium leak was found in the propulsion system due to a damaged seal. After getting into orbit, 2 more helium leaks were found, with 2 smaller leaks appearing after docking. Then, there were issues with the thrusters. The spacecraft has 28 thrusters, but 5 of them didn't work properly, which delayed the docking process. Engineers fixed 4 of them, and tests after docking showed that most were working fine, but 1 was still not working as it should. These helium leaks and thruster problems made people question whether the crew could return safely. Now, the teams at Boeing and NASA have to work together from the ground to solve these problems and decide if Starliner is ready for the return trip. NASA said they were bringing in more experts to help figure out what went wrong with Starliner. They brought in specialists from robotic spaceflight teams at Glenn Research Center, Goddard Space Flight Center, and JPL. These experts usually handle propulsion systems for spacecraft that are far away and gave useful advice. Ken Bowersox, who works with NASA's space operations, shared this information. Despite all this, Boeing and NASA don't seem to agree completely. On August 7th, Boeing said they still trust Starliner's ability and reasons for flying. However, NASA wasn't as sure. Ken Bowersox mentioned that NASA and Boeing have had open talks, but while Boeing trusts their spacecraft, NASA isn't as certain. It's reassuring to know NASA is working on the issue, but their final decision is what counts. They will decide together on how to proceed. In an unexpected twist, NASA had a backup plan to use a SpaceX spacecraft to bring the 2 astronauts back if needed. There's a disagreement between NASA and Boeing engineers, and they're not sure they fully understand the problem. If they can't figure it out, the astronauts might have to come back on SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft. SpaceX has been sending astronauts to the ISS with its Dragon spacecraft for more than 3 years. Just as I was finishing this update, it was announced that NASA decided the Boeing spacecraft was not safe. The 2 astronauts will return on SpaceX's Dragon, which is set to launch on September 24th, with their return planned for February 2025. The Dragon capsule can hold 4 people, but 2 seats will be left empty to make room for stranded astronauts. At the same time, the damaged Boeing Starliner will return to Earth without anyone on board. NASA seems to have lost trust in Boeing, as everyone agreed on this decision. Steve Stitch, who runs NASA's Commercial Crew program, said there was too much doubt about the thruster's reliability. Choosing SpaceX over Boeing ends weeks of uncertainty for the astronauts, but unfortunately, they'll be stuck in space for 8 more months than originally planned. Now, an important question comes up. How will they cope up there? What will they eat? How will they keep themselves busy? Will they stay mentally well? If you know anything about space travel or have seen movies about it, you know that astronauts are trained for situations just like this. They go through tough training, follow a strict diet, and take psychological tests to prepare for such events. But even with all this preparation, spending a long time in space can be very tough on both the body and mind. Just think about it. You're in space inside a small spacecraft, doing the same things every day. You haven't seen your friends or family in weeks, and you don't know when you'll be back. They can make phone calls to Earth using radio signals, and there's Wi-Fi on the space station, though it's slower than what we have on Earth. Thankfully, other crew members are also on the ISS, so the 2 astronauts won't be completely alone. So here we are with 2 astronauts waiting for a ride back to Earth. With concerns about Boeing's airline business growing, can you still fly in a Boeing airplane? Boeing was so fast to introduce the Starliner, the testing phase showed errors, but the joy of the Starliner's rise probably didn't let them make the right decisions. What a fall from the stars it has been for Boeing. Well, you know what the saying is, the higher the rise, the harder the fall.